Hey guys, how's it going? I hope you're doing well and welcome to another solarfallbaits video. So in this one we're going to be going a little bit back in time and kind of revisiting a concept that has been around for ages now, which is kind of this spoonhead lure without a lip. I'm talking about lures like Bassorino, Quick Fish, or even the famous Canadian Wiggler. And I'm going to put my own twist to this and try to kind of modernize the concept a little bit further from what it originally was. So let's see if I can make that happen. And yeah, let's get this train moving and see what we can do. Like always, I've already made a template out of this piece of paper and kind of traced out the idea that I have for this particular lure. And yeah, I'm using a piece of maple here in case somebody's wondering what sort of wood I use. It's pretty much always maple when it comes to making a master, which this is. So now that I have the outlines drawn on the piece of maple, I'm gonna head out to the garage and do a little bit of bandsawing with my trusty bandsaw. And like always, a little bit of finessing was required after the bandsawing, so I headed down to my disc sander and did a little bit of work after that with the belt sanding portion of the machine. If you've seen any of my other videos, you know what's coming next, which is the pilot hole for the eye socket. And I always like to do it at this point because everything is nice and square still, so getting a accurate 90-degree angle hole is pretty easy at this point. Alright, next we're gonna determine the halfway point of the lure, and this is just to give me a reference point later on to make sure that everything is nice and accurate. Like for example, where I will drill the holes for the line ties and hook hangers, where I will put the middle point of the profile template, but I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit here. So what I usually do, I will put it on a flat surface, trace out a line, and then I will flip it around and see if I was off. And this time around I was a little bit off, so my eyeballing is not as good as it used to be. And after that I will just mark out where the eyelets will be. They will be 1 centimeter apart, and there will be 3 of them because I intend to have 3 different kind of actions out of this lure. You will have to wait until the end to see if I was successful or not. But yeah, I will just then use an owl to mark them even deeper, and then I will just drill them out. Alright, so next we're going to start making the upper profile for our lure. I usually just do it from paper, and I will just fold a piece of paper that's kind of a rectangular shape. I will fold that in half. That'll give me my halfway point. Then I will place it on the lure, and I will kind of press it on each side. That will give me my thickness, and I will then trace out the rectangular box, kind of giving me outlines that I can't go over when I trace out the profile of the lure. Alright, so now that I've traced out the rectangular box that I can't go over, I will then just go ahead and start sketching out the profile itself. And I only need to do this on the other side, because I will then just fold a piece of paper in half again, and then I will cut that half, and I will unfold the thing, and boom, I have a perfectly symmetrical profile that I can use as a template. To make sure that my profile comes out nice and accurate, I will usually always just tape it down to make sure that it doesn't move around. While I was getting ready to do the project, I decided to actually make a prototype, which I hardly ever do. And during that time, I realized that, you know what, I should have made the head portion more of a cup. Because even though the lure did work without the cup, I figured it would probably help it catch more water and give it a little bit more action. So I'm going to be making a template to help me trace out the outlines for that cup next. And I'm going to be using the same exact technique that I used for the upper profile. And now we're back in the garage, and I'm going to be using the disc slash belt sander to get rid of excess material now and getting that profile nice and symmetrical. Alright, so I mentioned that I want to have a kind of a cup on the head portion to help the lure catch more water. So I'm going to be using my Dremel tool to gouge out a kind of a cup. Now I could have probably just used the Dremel tool to round off the lure, which probably would have been a smart thing to do, maybe make things go a little faster, but I always enjoy doing stuff with hand tools anyways. So I decided to grab my chisel first, but then I soon realized that, you know what, since the lure is curved, the grain is kind of not so easy to manipulate, and it chips out much more easier. So I brought out my hobby knife and finished the job with that. And of course, you can't really get the lure nice and smooth without using some sandpaper. So that's what I'm going to be doing next. I'm going to be rounding off the lure, finishing it off with some 150 grit sandpaper. And after that, I did actually go to 320 to make sure that the surface is nice and smooth. So now that the lure is nice and smooth, I'm going to go ahead and drill the eye socket holes. And I'm just going to pin the lure against the table, making this a little bit more safer than I would normally do, where I just palm the lure and drill the eye socket holes that way. I mean, I'm pretty comfortable doing that, but honestly, I can't recommend you guys doing that. You know, it's better to be safe than sorry. And honestly, I think I should be kind of setting an example here of how to do things safely. But anyways, let's move on. And next I'm going to be cutting up the template and using those pieces to trace out the head details. You know, I have to say, it's not always super easy to work with these kind of big sausage fingers that I have. I'm not sure if it translates to the camera that well, but yeah, my fingers are pretty big, and yeah, sometimes it's a struggle to get these small little pieces to stay in place and not cause me a ton of headache. But, you know, I make it work, at least most of the times. All right, so now that I have all the head details marked and drawn onto the lure, I'm going to scribe them with this 9mm thick hobby knife that I use pretty much exclusively for small carving details like this. to help me see a little bit better what I scribed on the lure, I'm actually going to take an eraser and wipe off all of the graphite, and some of that graphite will actually go into the grooves that I just scribed, helping me see them a little bit better. Alright, so the next step is painstakingly carving those details out and making them more 3D. And I actually always enjoy this part. The more intricate detail there is, the more I enjoy it. That might sound crazy, but you know, it is what it is, and I really thoroughly enjoy this part of the carving process. So unfortunately for me, I tend to be a little bit neurotic when it comes to making sure that everything is absolutely perfect. So I usually just go ahead and sand around those details that I carve. Not necessarily the scales themselves, because they're usually that small and you can't really notice that much imperfections in them. But on the head details, you definitely can. So I'm just gonna go ahead and sand those details down. So the next order of business is to carve out the fins. And I don't usually actually show this. I think I've shown this like maybe once or twice on my previous stuff on the channel. But I just decided to include it in here as well, because, you know, why not? I'm sure that there's at least a couple of guys out there who are kind of looking forward to this part as well. So here you go, enjoy. So now that I'm finally done with the fins, I'm going to be moving on to tracing out the lateral line. And I'm just gonna cut up this template and use that as a guide to draw on the lateral line, which will basically be a focal point for where all the scales will start. Next, I'm going to be determining the size of the scales for this lure, which will be 3 millimeters. So I'm going to be using this ruler to mark in 3 millimeter increments a dot, which will be the cross section for the scale grid pattern that I will be drawing on after this. And towards the tail section of the lure, I will actually switch to 2 millimeters, which will make it look a little bit more realistic. I mean, I'm not sure how realistic a banana-shaped lure is going to be, but, you know, that's what I decided to do. So normally at this point I would whip out my grid pattern tool that has the correct angle that I like to use for my fishing lures. But I was feeling a bit more adventurous this time around and decided to freehand the scale grid pattern. And I actually think it worked for my benefit because of the curvature of the lure. It's a little bit more difficult to get the angles correct. Now that I have the grid pattern laid down, I'm going to actually draw the scales on here. And I'm not sure how super necessary this is. I mean, it helps me definitely visualize the scales a little bit better. But if you're a seasoned veteran, this is probably not necessary. But definitely helps if you're just starting out or don't feel as confident. It definitely helps to have this kind of visual shape there. So now that I have all the scales drawn onto the lure, I'm gonna start scribing them out with the 9mm thick hobby knife that I use for all kinds of small little details like this. I know that there's guys out there who like to use rotary tools and stuff, but for me personally, I've never really liked how they look in the end. Although, that being said, on a bigger piece, obviously that's the way to go, I'm sure. It'll be a lot easier to do it with a rotary tool. But for small little things like this, I think a knife is a lot better. But, you know, you do you, I do me. Carving out the scales themselves is a rather delicate procedure, but not impossible. The way I usually go about this is that I kind of get into this flow state where I just do a couple of rows, take a small little break, and repeat. And that is usually a pretty good way to go about this because carving out the scales the way that I do it is kind of strenuous on your fingers and, of course, your wrist as well. So now that the scales are done, I'm going to start making the lateral line holes. And I'm just going to go along that guideline that I drew on earlier, and I'm going to be using an awl to just press the indentations into the wood. Now the carving is pretty much done, and I'm just going to attach the line ties and the hook hanger forms into place. And obviously these don't need to be structurally sound, they just need to be there, because this is going to be a mold master, not the actual lure. And I'm just going to be attaching them with super glue. So now that my mold master is done, I can actually focus on the mold itself. And I'm going to start off by filling it up with mold clay. And obviously you can see here that I've constructed the box from Legos. And the first thing I need to do is to make sure that the mold clay is completely flat in the box. Obviously this is going to be a two-piece mold, and making sure that the surfaces are flat will help with flashing later on. Determining the orientation of the mold master inside the mold box is actually a pretty vital step, and there's a few rules that you should follow when you do this. First of all, you should have the pour hole on the highest point of your lure. In my case, it's going to be on the back. That will help me vent out most of the air when I cast the lure, and also because I'm going to be using micro balloons to make the lure float. They have a tendency of floating to the top when the lure is curing inside the mold, which actually will give me a lift, and we can use that to kind of orient the lure much better in the water and make it track properly. So now that I have determined how the lure is going to be sitting in the mold box, I'm going to basically excavate a hole for the other half of the mold master, and I'm going to be placing the mold master inside that cavity. Now that I have the hole excavated for the mold master, I'm going to place it in the mold and press it in. And after that I can start filling out the mold. Alright, so now that I have the mold master secured in place and ready to go, I'm gonna start putting in locator holes around the mold box. And I usually like to use the ends of drill bits or a pencil, for example, to press in indentations all around the mold box. And I also usually like to use different sizes to just make sure that everything is going to be lining up properly later on. Alright, we're at that point where I can start filling up the mold box. And for that I'm using Mold Max 30 from Smooth On. This is pretty much my go-to silicone when it comes to making molds. I've been using it for years and I really don't have any reason to switch to any other brand. It just works perfectly for what I do. And I'm going to be mixing 250 grams of silicone for this mold box. Alright, so now that we have the silicone part in the cup, I'm just going to be adding the accelerator, which is going to be really easy to calculate for Mold Max 30. So 250 grams means you need 25 grams of the accelerator. And obviously you need to make sure that you mix vigorously and make sure that the accelerator and silicone mix thoroughly together. A good rule of thumb is when you don't see any white streaks, you're good. Alright, here's a little trick that I've actually shown on the channel a few times before, but you know, might as well share it here too. What I usually do is I pour a thin layer of silicone on top of the mold master, let that sit for 10 minutes. Usually that is enough time for all of the air bubbles to burst and make sure that the side that is facing the mold master is going to be completely void of any kind of air bubbles. While I was waiting for the air bubbles to burst on that skin that I just poured on the mold master, I'm actually going to be adding some more filler into the mold mix. And these will be ground up pieces of old molds that I had around. And for that I use a meat grinder. And again, I make sure that I mix the concoction well together. After 24 hours, the mold silicone has cured and it's time to take apart the mold box. Well, at least half of it. I make sure that I get all of the mold clay out of the mold box, and after that I can start prepping the mold for the second half. There are a few ways to prep the mold for the second half. Some people like to use spray-on release agents, and some people like me like to use Vaseline and smear it all over the place. I personally like it because it's more economical and I can make sure that it actually gets everywhere. With spray-on stuff, it kind of is hit and miss with me at least. I feel like I need to do several layers and I don't have time for that. Alright, so now 24 hours has elapsed again, the mold is cured, and I can start taking apart the mold box. Here's a little tip for you guys who are wondering how much plastic I should be using in the first castings, and kind of determining how much volume you need is kind of difficult. So what I usually do is I just fill up the mold with water and measure the amount of water that I have in the cavity. And that usually gives me at least a rough idea how much volume I'm going to be needing with the casting resin. Alright, we're gonna jump ahead a little bit here, and I've actually made quite a few of these lures already, and I'm gonna start painting them. And for this one I chose kind of a natural color, and we're gonna start with this chrome silver and see what happens. And the species of fish we're going to be imitating here is going to be something called a red-side dace, which is kind of a new species for me. I mean, of course I know what a dace looks like, but I've never actually seen a red-side dace before, so this is kind of a fun new thing for me to try to paint. Looking at images of red-sided dace on Google, I noticed that they have a lot of interesting metallic colors to them. And I'm going to try to imitate that now. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be spraying just a tad bit of this bright brass on the upper side of the lateral line, and let's see what happens. The next interesting color going in is going to be this dark green tin from the Vallejo, the Shifters line. And yeah, we're going to be spraying that just above the bright brass that I just painted in. Next color going in is going to be this sepia, and I'm really excited to be able to use this because I don't get to use it too often, and I really like how it blends with green in particular. It will make the colors blend together a lot better, I feel, and hopefully make it look a little bit more realistic. The red-sided dace has a lot of variation when it comes to its color combination and also the shade of those colors. So for this one I chose a little bit more muted color scheme, and for that I'm using this pink, which I will accentuate with some other colors later on. But we're going to start with this kind of a stippling technique to make the line appear a little bit more ragged and not so uniform. To add a little bit of realism to the line that I just stippled on, I'm going to be adding a few blotches of orange into the mix as well. Now that I have all the major colors in, I'm going to be using this wash technique to basically highlight the scales and some of the other parts around the head as well. You can buy these washes from various stores that sell airbrush paint. However, you can also make it yourself. And my mixture usually that I use is whatever paint I'm using, I'm usually putting roughly 25% of airbrush cleaner into it. And that way it's pretty easy to just wipe it off. Alright, moving on. Next part we're going to be highlighting with this red is going to be the head details. I personally really like how this looks, but obviously this is up for debate if it's a good look or not. You could use some other muted colors. Orange comes to mind, probably pink would look pretty good as well. Probably black as well might be a pretty good highlighter. But you know, it's just one of those things you want to experiment and see what works for you and what you like. So usually when you do the wash technique, especially on the scales, it kind of smears the belly a little bit. So I'm going to go over that with some white. Now that I've covered those smudges with the white, I'm gonna go over this with pearlescent white, and that'll give me a nice realistic belly color. So now that I have all the major colors in, I'm going to be painting the fins. And I don't think I've ever shown on my channel how I make the fin stencil, so let's go over that. I start off by grabbing a piece of paper and placing that firmly on a lure, and I will then use a pencil to rub the outlines of the fin into the piece of paper. Now that I have the indentation on the piece of paper, I will just flip it around and then trace out that outline with another pencil. Next I will cut off the outlines with a 9mm hobby knife. So now that I have that cut off piece, I'm actually going to use that as a template to paint outlines of another fin. Then I would just cover both sides of that piece of paper with packing tape, and this will actually be my stencil for the fins. Obviously you could use see-through plastic here as well, but I was in a hurry and this is a really fast way to go about this. And the nice thing about this is that you can just wipe off the paint and you can use this stencil over and over again. And now that the stencil is covered with packing tape, I will just cut out the excess with my hobby knife. So yeah, that's a fast way of making your own fin stencil, and it will be pretty much 100% accurate. And yeah, let's move on. So next we're gonna be painting those fins, and I chose this kind of a more grayish muted color for the fins because I think it's gonna look pretty nice on this lure, because a lot of the species of days kind of have this more of a see-through pectoral fin, and that's what we're going for here. This next step is something I've been doing a lot recently on lures that have an open mouth, where I paint the mouth black. I personally like how it looks, and yeah, obviously you can have your own opinion on that, if it looks good or not. I think it does, but yeah, it's just one of those things. Since I'm an erotic detail freak, I decided to paint the nose holes as well, because, you know, why not? I mean, they're there, so might as well highlight them too. And there, we're done. Except I need to glue in the eyes, and of course I'm using 5-minute epoxy to do that. It probably doesn't come as a surprise if you see in my other videos that I always use true coat epoxy nowadays. Honestly, it's the best epoxy out there for fishing lures. It gives a beautiful glossy finish, and it's also very durable, and it doesn't smell horrible. So what's there not to like? Alright, so I decided, you know what, I'm gonna show you guys all of the different color patterns that I decided to paint during this paint session. And all of these colors will be available in my web store. Link is in the description box. And you can purchase these lures and some others that I have available at the moment from the store. But yeah, let's have a look at some of these lures. Alright, let's have a look how these different line type positions actually affect the action of the lure. You know, I was actually going to go and test this in a pond that's nearby, but winter kind of crept on me and everything is pretty much frozen now. You know, it sucks, but like I said before, it is what it is. But nevertheless, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Like the video if you did, support me on Patreon if you want, and I think the future is looking pretty busy for me, but I'll try to pop in here once in a while and post new stuff. So with that, hope you guys enjoyed. See you guys on the next one.